defendants, including Mr. Trump, have bond agreements in place.
That's exactly right, Gervier and Brooks. Good morning to you. Mr. Trump's bond is set at $200,000, and that is the highest so far of any of the 19 defendants. He is expected to turn himself in Thursday here at the Fulton County Jail. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Mr. Trump said, "Can you believe it? I'll be going to Atlanta, Georgia on Thursday to be arrested by a radical left district attorney, Fani Willis." He went on to call the case against him a witch hunt and election interference. We've learned former Trump election attorney John Eastman is planning to turn himself in tomorrow. He'll be released on a $100,000 bond. A total of 5 bond agreements were reached yesterday. The terms of Trump's bond are more extensive than the others so far. He is explicitly barred from using social media to attack any of his co-defendants or any witnesses or unindicted co-conspirators. As far as the booking process goes, legal experts tell us it will go much faster than it would for the average accused criminal.
So almost everyone who's going to surrender here in Georgia will have a bond agreement in place if possible. And the reason for that is they don't have to then wait to go before a magistrate judge to have their bail bond set.
So with that bond agreement in place, the defendants should be in and out of the jail quickly. The sheriff said last week that all of them, including the former president, will have their fingerprints taken and mugshots taken. Live at the Fulton County Jail, Rebecca Schramm, Atlanta News First.
Thanks, Rebecca. It's 4 minutes after 9. As Rebecca just mentioned, we're likely going to see the same scenario play out with all the defendants. There is incentive to have a bond agreement in place before surrendering to the Fulton County Jail. Without a bond already in place, these defendants could be held in custody for a longer period of time. So here's how the consent bond works. Attorneys on behalf of their clients tell the state why they believe the defendant is eligible for bond. Those factors include things like the type of charges, whether the defendant is a flight risk, whether they'd intimidate any person or talk to any co-defendant. If a judge decides in favor of bond, the state and the defendant enter the terms of agreement, which the judge has to approve. Now, in these 3 cases, the RICO charges carry the highest bond.